Square G14. August heat pressing through the blue shade fabric, the Saronic Gulf sitting 200 meters south, salt on the back of every breath. The trowel goes in at 15 degrees, always 15, because that's the angle that lifts compacted coastal sand without disturbing what's underneath. If the engineering secrets behind history's most legendary battles fascinate you, subscribe now. What the bones in this Greek soil reveal about Thermopylae will change everything you thought you knew about the Spartans. What's underneath in this square at this depth is a left tibia, then a sternum, then 3 centimeters northeast, a pelvis. Supine male burial, 5th century BC by stratigraphic context. One of more than 80 individuals at the Phaleron site. Skeleton 47 is the wrong body in the wrong place at the wrong time, which means he's exactly right.
Sternum crack, visible at the lateral edge of the manubrium, propagating toward the right of the body midline. If this man died from a weapon strike, sword, spear, axe, the force vector reads differently. This reads inward, like the rib cage was compressed from the left side.
Petros Hadjis is the site osteologist. Every fracture carries a force vector. Every wound leaves geometry. The sternum crack on skeleton 47 has geometry that doesn't match a battlefield slash, doesn't match a stabbing wound. It matches something that pressed into the body from the left and slightly forward. Phaleron, in the 5th century BC, wasn't Spartan territory. It was Athenian. The 80-plus individuals here include several with isotopic chemistry consistent with non-Aegean origin. Skeleton 47 is one of those. The strontium in his teeth says he didn't grow up here. The muscle attachment points on his femur say he carried weight on his left side, a shield, a heavy one. If this man carried a shield on his left and died from force applied to his left chest, who was he standing across from?
The nearest classical source account at Phaleron during the Persian Wars is Herodotus, Book 9. But that's the aftermath of Plataea, 140 kilometers from here. There's no direct literary record of a formation engagement at this site. Whatever happened at Phaleron, the ancient writers didn't think it was worth describing.
This is the gap where physical evidence lives. Between the lines the ancient writers bothered to write. If you want to understand how 300 men stopped the largest army the ancient world had assembled, don't start in Sparta. Start here, in this Greek coastal soil, with a skeleton who doesn't fit the story. The story usually sounds like this. Spartans held against impossible odds because dying in the line was the only death worth having, something that can't be measured or reproduced. The physical record tells a different one. The hoplon shield weighs between 7 and 9 kilograms, diameter 75 to 90 centimeters. The porpax arm strap threads the forearm to the mid-arm. A hand grip at the rim completes the hold. These features add up to a shield you can't wield as an individual weapon. The geometry doesn't allow it. The hoplon is designed to function in a specific formation, at a specific spacing, in a specific relationship to the shields beside it. Remove those men and it becomes awkward, marginal. Put them back, and it transforms. The phalanx wasn't a cultural expression. It was an engineered machine. And if it was engineering, any Greek city that adopted the equipment could field the same system. Back in square G14, Petros reads the angle aloud. Vanya Sidorova writes it in her field notebook.
Force vector consistent with a left lateral compression at approximately 32 degrees from the midline. Someone standing to this man's left front, driving forward, not swinging, pushing. The left rim of a shield driving into the exposed right chest as the formation closed.
The Greeks had a word for this, othismos, the push. In a phalanx engagement, after the initial spear work, what happened wasn't sword fighting, it was a press. The men in back put their weight into the men in front, and the men in front drove through their shields into the formation across from them. The mass of the formation became a single force, and if the man at the front stumbled, the shield rim of the man beside him could ride over the gap and into the exposed chest of the next man back. This is how Skeleton 47 likely died. Not from a thrown spear, from the mechanical operation of a system he was standing against.
The wound geometry is consistent with the othismos, performed by a formation using the standard Greek hoplon. This could have been Athenian soldiers. It could have been allied Greeks from any city. The skeletal record doesn't tell us who was on the other side, only what they did.
The othismos is the Spartan formation technique, described by ancient sources as the defining mark of Spartan training and Spartan discipline. But this man didn't die at Sparta. He died at Phaleron, which means the Athenians were doing it too, which means it wasn't a Spartan secret at all. The question hangs in the August heat above square G14. The formation that supposedly made Sparta exceptional, was it Sparta's? Or was it everyone's? The University of Thessaloniki's experimental archaeology laboratory is a large cold room with fluorescent lights and the kind of concrete floor that makes your ankles ache after an hour. It isn't a romantic space, but what happens inside it is. Vanya's team has brought replicas of the standard hoplite kit, shield, spear, greaves, helmet, for controlled trials. The volunteers are 2 graduate students and an athletic trainer there to make sure nobody injures themselves. The shields alone weigh 8 kilograms. This sounds manageable until you're holding one.
8 kilograms at arm's length is significantly more load than 8 kilograms held close to the body. The porpax distributes the weight through the forearm, but the moment you extend the shield to cover your left side, the combat position, the torque on the shoulder is substantial.
The first volunteer, Nikos, 23, athletic, enthusiastic about ancient military history, takes the combat stance. He holds it for 4 minutes. Then his forearm gives, his shoulder drops, the shield tilts, and Chara says, if this were real, he'd be dead.
Ancient sources describe the othismos lasting upward of 30 minutes. Our volunteer lasted 4 minutes before the shield arm failed. This is either a training gap of extraordinary magnitude or our reconstruction has an error. I choose to believe reconstruction error because the alternative involves Nikos reconsidering his life choices.
This is where experimental archaeology gets interesting. Something is wrong, and wrong means there's information you haven't found yet. While Nikos recovers, Vanya studies the shield, not the bronze outer face, but the inside, the porpax position, the relationship between the arm strap and the hand grip. She's thinking about how every modern illustration, based on a small number of surviving originals, shows the porpax centered on the shield's vertical axis. She asks Nikos to stand up. Hold it the way it feels right, she says, not the way the drawings show. Move the strap to where your arm wants to be. Nikos shifts the porpax 7 centimeters toward the rim. The torque on his shoulder drops immediately. You can see it in his posture, the way his shoulder settles. He holds the adjusted position for 12 minutes before the researchers call time. He stops because they tell him to, not because he can't continue. 7 centimeters. An offset confirmed by re-examining 2 surviving originals in the Athens National Museum, where the porpax mounting holes are, in fact, slightly off-center, catalogued for a century as manufacturing variation. It isn't variation, it's the design. What does a 7-centimeter offset do to the formation? When 2 men with correctly positioned shields stand side by side, the shield's working edges overlap in a different plane, 15 degrees. Scaled to a full formation, that shift changes where the shield edge sits relative to the man beside you, and relative to the man across from you. which changes the wound vector of any force applied through the rim. The wound clustering at Phaleron, too tight, too consistent to be random battlefield trauma, suddenly has a mechanical explanation. The shields in the formation were making contact in a predictable, geometrically consistent way, because the porpax offset made them. Meanwhile, an email from Professor Konstantinos Alexiou of the University of Athens has arrived. His paper, published in the Classical Antiquity Review the week before Vanya's results are ready to present, is titled Sparta as Psychotechnology, Cultural Conditioning as Military Advantage in the Persian Wars. Thorough, well-sourced. It argues the decisive difference at Thermopylae wasn't mechanical but psychological. Spartan warriors had been conditioned since childhood to view the formation's integrity as a moral obligation stronger than self-preservation. It doesn't mention the Phaleron data. It was written before the results were complete. Published anyway.
He's published before our results are complete. Thorough man.
She puts her phone face down. She picks up the 8-kilogram shield in the adjusted grip, holds it at arm's length for 30 seconds. Then she sets it down and writes one word in her field notebook. The word is good. A rebuttal published before the evidence is presented is a rebuttal written without the evidence, and evidence doesn't go away. Alexiou isn't wrong that Spartan cultural conditioning was a military advantage. Soldiers who believe dying in the line is the correct outcome will hold longer than those who don't. But the cultural conditioning worked because the mechanical system worked. A Spartan, in the right formation, with the right equipment in the right terrain, was nearly unkillable. A Spartan alone with a badly positioned shield was just a man. The engineering made the culture possible, not the other way around. Nikos is back on his feet. The shields are in their test positions. The recording equipment is running, and somewhere in the Athens National Museum, 2 original hoplon shields sit in their cases with porpax holes that a century of catalogers called inconsistencies. The pass at Thermopylae isn't impressive to look at today. The sea has retreated. Silt deposits over 2.5 millennia have pushed the coastline several kilometers east. The narrow corridor between cliff and water is now a road, a monument, a tourist site. The geography that made it a killing ground is harder to read. But geological survey and ancient shoreline reconstruction give us the dimensions. At its narrowest during the Persian Wars, the Thermopylae Pass was approximately 14 meters wide. 14 meters. A modern highway lane is 3.5 meters. 4 lanes, side by side. That's the width of the bottleneck through which Xerxes attempted to move 60 to 80,000 men. A Greek phalanx file, 1 man and 7 behind him, occupied roughly 1 meter of front. 8 files abreast covered 8 meters. In a 14-meter pass, the Greeks fielded 14 files across. Xerxes could also field 14 men across. His remaining 60 to 79,986 men stood behind the 14 actually fighting. The numerical advantage wasn't just neutralized at Thermopylae, it was inverted. The pass turned 80,000 into 14, the same number as the Greek front rank. And the Greek formation in this terrain had one specific advantage the Persian army didn't: the hoplon's left side coverage. In the traditional Greek left oblique advance, each man's shield overlaps the exposed right side of the man to his left. This creates a wall, 14 shields layered, each protecting the gap the previous one leaves. Persian infantry, fighting as individuals or in looser groups, had no equivalent. Their shields, their spears, their armor, all excellent equipment, all designed for individual protection, not for an interlocking mechanical system. That's the structural asymmetry Thermopylae made visible. Not Spartan courage against Persian numbers, Spartan engineering against Persian individualism. The narrow pass stripped away everything that numbers could do, leaving only what the two systems did at the point of contact. The Plataea data is complete. Vanya's team has mapped the wound angle distributions from the Plataea skeletal record against the battlefield terrain, the flat Boeotian plain, the Greek encampment on the Asopos Ridge, the Persian advance across open ground. The wound vectors don't map neatly onto the formation geometry that ancient sources describe. The othismos wounds, compression injuries, shield rim contacts, cluster in a pattern consistent with a double-depth formation at the center. 16 men deep behind the front rank, rather than 8. A formation within a formation. No ancient source describes this. Herodotus describes the Spartan deployment. Thucydides, writing 40 years later, doesn't have direct witness accounts of Plataea's formation specifics. Plutarch's Life of Aristides mentions the Greek commanders but not the geometry. The physical record at Plataea is, as Vanya writes in her notes, the only witness. And the witness says, someone used a double-depth center formation and didn't write it down. This was operational knowledge, craft knowledge, transmitted through practice, not through text. The same way a blacksmith's technique isn't in the guild's written charter, but in the apprentice's hands after 7 years. This is what the formation actually was. Not a moral statement, not a cultural performance, a craft. Passed hand to hand, adjusted for terrain, adjusted for enemy, adjusted for the width of a pass and the slope of a ridge. The men weren't heroes in the literary sense. They were practitioners, craftsmen of organized violence. And the craft was sophisticated enough that 2,500 years later, the only record of its most refined technique is the angle at which it broke the bones of the men it was used against. Skeleton 47's sternum crack, the lateral force vector, the shield rim geometry, all consistent with the othismos. But Petros's final report adds one more detail.
The force vector is consistent with the othismos. However, the angle suggests the closing force came from a formation slightly deeper than the standard 8-file depth. The lateral spread of the compression is greater than a single rank would produce. This man was pushed by the accumulated force of more men than our standard reconstruction accounts for, possibly double depth at the point of impact.
Double depth at the point of impact.
The answer lies in this offset porpax. For 100
Not
years,
just Plataea.
fragment-
Phaleron, the unwritten technique, the craft secret, was being used at an Athenian site, in an engagement nobody bothered to record, by soldiers who weren't Spartans. If you want to know what 300 men understood at Thermopylae that 60,000 Persian soldiers didn't, it's this. The battle was a craft problem, the terrain was the material, the formation was the tool, and the tool was better than anything the opposition carried. If this is the kind of history that gets under your skin, the kind that lives in bones and bronze and the width of a mountain pass, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting. None of them will tell you what you expected. The conference room at the Archaeology faculty of the University of Athens holds approximately 120 people. Good projector. The kind of room where established ideas defend themselves quietly and persistently, the way a phalanx holds ground. Not by moving, by not moving. Konstantinos Alexio is in the third row, left side, with a notepad. He has published the rebuttal. He's here out of professional courtesy and the confidence that comes from being right about something for 30 years. He looks like a man who has answered this question. Vanya Sidorova's presentation runs 47 minutes. She starts with skeleton 47, the sternum crack on the projector screen, wound photograph, vector diagram, force angle measurement. She doesn't say this disproves the Spartan exceptionalism thesis. She says, this is what the physical record shows. Then she shows the next piece, and the next. The sequence: Phaleron wound mapping, experimental reconstruction, the offset porpax, the 15-degree formation shift, Thermopylae terrain, the 14-meter calculation, Platea wound angles. The double depth center in the bone record. 47 minutes of physical evidence from 3 years of work, presented in the order it was found. She doesn't argue with Alexio's published position. The evidence does it for her, the way a formation argues, not by speaking, by holding. Alexio's question during the Q&A is measured. The ancient sources describe the psychological dimension as primary, he says. The men who held Thermopylae weren't holding because of porpax geometry. They held because they'd been told their entire lives that dying in the formation was the only death that mattered. Can physical evidence speak to that? Vanya's answer is also measured.
The cultural conditioning made the men willing to stand in the formation. The formation made the men survivable enough that willing was sufficient. These two things didn't compete. One produced the other. Without the shield geometry, the courage gets you killed in 3 minutes instead of 3 days. The engineering was what made the culture possible.
Consistent offset of the mounting holes. It's not a mistake.
In the front row, slightly right of where Alexio is writing, is Takis Moratides. Clean shirt, no faculty position, no publication record, just a volunteer excavation certificate from Phaleron, and the spatial memory that identified the bone deposit clustering before any trained archaeologist did. Vanya's acknowledgement slide includes his name. She reads from it. Takis Moratides, volunteer excavator, whose observation last August was the first accurate description of the othismos closing pattern at Phaleron. He had no theoretical framework for what he was seeing. He described it the way it looked, which was the right way. The outsider sees what the formation can't. Not because the outsider is smarter, because standing outside is the only position from which the whole shape of the thing is visible. Herodotus was inside the story. Thucydides was inside it. Plutarch was inside the story of people who were inside the story. They saw the courage. They didn't see the engineering. You can't see it from inside the formation. It holds everything together from below, the same way the oak core holds the bronze face of the hoplon, invisible until the shield breaks and you see what it was made of. The question the physical record answers isn't, were the Spartans brave? They were brave. The question is, why did bravery here produce an outcome that bravery 100 other times had failed to produce? The answer is in the ground at Phaleron, in the offset porpax in the Athens Museum, in the 14 meters of a pass that doesn't exist anymore, the double-depth formation nobody wrote down, and the wound angle of a man who died at an Athenian site from a technique everyone called Spartan. The answer is craft. The answer is always craft. After the presentation, Vanya packs her notes. Field notebook, battered, coffee-ringed, cover warped from August humidity, closed and set in her bag. She has a flight back to the Phaleron site in the morning. Square G15 hasn't been touched. The season runs 2 more weeks. Skeleton 47 has been re-examined, photographed, measured, described, argued over at an international conference, and cited in a paper that will take 2 years to pass peer review. He did his job. The men who stood at Thermopylae didn't know they were holding the most analyzed ground in military history. They knew their forearms were burning. They knew the man to the left was breathing steadily. They didn't know why the formation was holding. The why was in the geometry, invisible from inside, the same craft secret never written down because the men who knew it were always inside it, and the men who could see it from outside were writing a different story. The formation holds. It always held. Not because of heroes, because of engineering. And if you know where to look for it, it's still there. In the angle of a wound, in the position of an arm strap, In the width of a mountain pass, the sea has been slowly filling in since before anyone alive was born. The craft that built the formation that stopped an empire has been buried for 2,500 years. It's still being excavated, one trowel at a time.